social distancing at the chamber. My name is Garrick Taylor. It's a Wednesday night edition of Happy Hour with Hammer, as always joined by the CEO of the Arizona Chamber, Glenn Hammer. Hey, Glenn.
Good to see you, Garrick.
Glenn, special guest from the world of small business advocacy. Why don't you introduce Chad, who's been a great partner of ours?
Well, it's great to have Chad Heinrich, who is serving as the Arizona State Director for NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Businesses. We've had a long association with Chad. Chad's very respected in the business community and the chamber community, and has been doing a great job with NFIB. Welcome to the show, Chad.
Well, thanks for hosting me, Glenn, and I hope I can live up to that introduction. I really appreciate that and appreciate working with you and the chamber team.
Well, we woke up today greeted by this just terrific release from NFIB about a feature of Proposition 208 that that really hasn't received much, if any, airtime, and that has to do with there's sins of commission and there's sins of omission, and there's a sin of omission here that's a pretty big deal. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure, Glenn. Happy to do so. Yeah, I think it was definitely a sin of omission, and from the proponent's perspective on Prop 208, it's definitely a feature, not a flaw. Prop 208, as you know, would crush small businesses by implementing a 77.7% income tax increase on incomes over $250,000 for individuals and $500,000 for joint filers. And as we looked closer at this, we realized that in crafting their proposition, the proponents did not take into consideration a benefit that's already in Arizona state law for Arizona income tax filers and included in federal income tax filers on the individual side. And that is a protection against inflation and what tax folks call bracket creep. And really all that means is, I'll use round numbers as an example. Let's say there was a bracket increase at $100 of income this year, and we had a 3% increase in our inflation rate for this year. Well, what the federal and the state current tax schemes do is adjust for that inflation. So it adjusts the bracket up so that the taxpayer doesn't get caught into a higher tax bracket, even with only having their increase of income being adjusted for inflation. And so by not having this in Prop 208 in the proposed proposition, what will end up happening is it will sweep more and more individuals and small business owners into that 77.7% tax increase. And that's the main problem.
Well, you used a phrase here, and this was pretty strong language here, and I'm trying to find it. You said, in part, because of this feature, the initiative should be known as the Small Business Destruction Act. And, this new 8% income tax rate, we keep emphasizing this hits far more than individuals who may be making a nice salary today. This hits a lot of our entrepreneurial, our small businesses that organize under different portions of the individual income tax. So you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. And I think it's important for your viewers to know that Arizona is really a small business state. According to the Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy, there are over 1 million people working for small businesses in Arizona as of last year. And actually, small business employs about 43% of all employees in the state. And so we have over 500,000 small businesses in Arizona. And so, that's a key piece of Arizona's fabric to remember. Why I call this a Small Business Destruction Act is because it will be hitting all of several of those businesses that are organized as what tax people call pass-through entities. And all that means is it's an LLC or an S Corp, something that does not have shareholders. Or it could also be just Glenn Hammer Incorporated, and it could be you, a truck, and a toolbox out servicing customers' needs. So it really impacts business owners that are everything from a solo business owner up to business owners that employ hundreds of people, but are not organized as corporations for the purposes of tax.
My final question before turning this over to Garrick. Well, can't the legislature just amend this? This is an obvious design defect. So the legislature, if this travesty should pass, the legislature could just come in and make sure that we don't have bracket creep, correct?
Well, that may be what some folks see as a way to fix this, but that would be a near impossibility in Arizona. One of the features that we have in Arizona was adopted in 1998, and that was called Prop 105. And what that requirement puts on voter enacted measures is something called voter protection, meaning that to make any changes, so if the voters are to enact this proposition in the fall, it would require a 3/4 vote of the legislature, and any changes that the legislature would adopt have to, quote, further the purpose of the act. So even if you have a supermajority of 3/4 vote of each house in the legislature to pass a change, you're more than likely going to end up in court if it doesn't clearly further the purpose of the act. So we would be trapped. We would be trapped in the language of this proposition.
I knew that, but I figured I was going to ask that to get that educational response, because that's something that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of, is that even if something would be a common sense type change that would have strong public and bipartisan support, once it passes, because of that feature of Arizona law, there are no returns, so to speak.
Yeah, there aren't, and I would just also like your viewers to understand the competitiveness of the Arizona individual income tax right now. The current top rate that's paid by Arizona income taxpayers, individuals, and these pass-through entities, these small businesses, is 4.5%. So this would raise that rate to 8%, meaning the 77.7% increase. Corporations in Arizona today pay 4.9%. And so you would be placing small business owners in a bracket nearly twice as high as what corporations are paying. So there's something to be said about tax fairness, and this does not take that into consideration.
So you're saying that an entrepreneurial family-owned business in Arizona would be paying more than, say, a $2 trillion company like Apple?
That's what I'm saying, Glenn. That is what I'm saying.
That doesn't seem fair to me.
It doesn't seem fair to me either, Chad, that your members are going to be paying a tax rate higher than the Fortune 500. But there's an element of this whole campaign and the environment that we find ourselves in that this is insult to injury. Could you talk a little bit about what your members are going through right now during an economic season that has been, I hate to use an overused word, but it's been unprecedented?
Well, absolutely, Garrick, and I think that's a really good point. Is this is definitely the wrong time to put something like this in the front of voters, and the reason is we're in the midst of a recovery from the worldwide pandemic of COVID-19, and in some sectors of the small business economy, our businesses, if they're still open, are trying to work through, in some cases, 60 to 70% of loss of business to more. And so they are struggling from week to week to maintain the employees that they have and keep them on, keep the doors open and the lights on in their businesses. We're not talking about big businesses here. We're talking about mom and pop restaurants, small hotels, uh, the local plumber. These businesses are all being hit hard by the impacts of COVID-19 and the business closures. And this is really the wrong time to even be considering something like this.
Right. You know, the income levels that we're talking about, whether for single filers or joint filers, I think to the average Joe Arizona, they look like big numbers. But as you just said, for a small business, this is not money that slides into the pocket of the entrepreneur. This is the money that becomes the working capital for the next year, and to bridge those gaps between orders, between jobs, and during ebbs and flows. Chad, it strikes me, though, that something you touched on earlier is that $250,000 in 2020 terms is a lot different than in the year 2030 or 2040. The buying power is really going to diminish, and yet there's nothing in Proposition 208 that plans for that. And yet you, I, and the rest of Arizona, we potentially could be stuck with this forever.
Yeah, in real terms, the number of 250,000 could be cut in half and applied today in say 10 or 20 years. So because we're not accounting for inflation, we're going to sweep more and more taxpayers into that. And I would also add that, you know, when people think of a $250,000 income, they think, well, this is a tax on, quote, the rich. But what folks are not understanding is small businesses are paying taxes of all of the income that's flowing into their business through their individual tax return. So one's tax return, if it's Chad Heinrich's tax return and I have 5 employees, it doesn't take very long to get to those levels of income when you're running a small business. And that's reflected on your individual return, and you'll be swept into this. So I've seen some estimates where there'll be 10 to 50,000 of Arizona's top income taxpayers that will be swept into this and paying significant portion of this tax. Now, the other thing to consider with those folks is, in many cases, these folks are not necessarily tied to only doing business in Arizona, and we don't want to lose the people that are paying into our tax system right now.
That to me is a very important point, because if you look at what would happen in terms of the surrounding states, basically outside of California, we would have the highest small business tax, if you will. We'd be higher than Utah, we'd be higher than Colorado. We'd certainly be higher than Nevada, which I believe is at 0, Texas at 0. So for our state's competitiveness, and we're in the freest country in the world, that's got to be a concern for a state that's really been built on growth. And I would just say that I'm looking at someone, I don't think you're from the state of Arizona. I know I'm not from the state of Arizona. I think 70% of adults are from somewhere else. And when you take a look at our growth and what that's meant in terms of the budget and all those things, that could end that music pretty quickly if we did something like this.
Yeah, it certainly could, Glenn, and you may be catching some of my Midwestern accent during my interview. But I am also an Arizona import, as you are. And you know, the one thing that I would key off of your comment there is the word growth and how important that is. And the other thing that I think that the individual should understand is that small businesses, when they're talking about growth, they're not looking at this tax year in a silo. They may be looking at this tax year, next tax year, and next year as an opportunity to save some of those earnings I earned in 2019 and maybe use them to make it through 2020. So as an example. So, you know, taking and nearly doubling that top tax rate, taking those revenues, which could be retained and used to purchase capital, to buy that new truck, to hire those new employees, that's going to be a detriment to small business. They don't look at years in silos. They look at the time frame of their business in longer than a year.
Chad, that's such an important point, because you could say, since Governor Fife Symington really put us on this road to tax competitiveness, whether it was Governor Symington Governor Hull, Governor Napolitano, Governor Brewer, Governor Ducey. We're talking about 5 governors over a quarter century. We could look anyone in the eye and say, I can't tell you exactly what our business climate will be next year, but I can tell you it'll be better than it was this year. We have made that promise and we've kept it for over a quarter century. This passes, that's game over. And then it becomes more like what I say about California. I can't tell you how much worse it'll be next year, but I can tell you it will be worse. And, you know, people also look at where a state is going, where that trajectory is going. And this just ruins it in one initiative.
I completely agree.
You know, Chad, before we let you go, I'm struck by some of the rhetoric of the proponents in all of this. And I'm just going to put myself in the shoes of one of your members, that one good year does not an entire business cycle make. And I think this is the point that you've made. Maybe your previous years were losses, and yet you could come into this new proposition, this new tax rate, and you're going to find yourself at an 8% tax rate when your previous years were perhaps real struggles. Or, Chad, I'm sure you deal with the entrepreneur who's just about to make that move out of the garage into their first warehouse or first workspace, and they've been losing money or barely breaking even, and yet now they are treated in the Bill Gates tax bracket, at least in terms of the individual income tax rate in Arizona.
Yeah. I mean, this will impact their small business owners' ability to expand, meaning both in capital purchases. Maybe they need to lease some more space to grow their business. Maybe they need to hire somebody. These aren't decisions that they make in a silo, as I mentioned, within the silo of 1 year. They plan. And just like any business owner does, is they plan over multiple years. If I had a good year this year, and next year maybe, then I can hire a person. But I won't be able to do that unless I have the savings to do that. And this is going to reach into their pocket before they've even had a chance to make those investments.
Yeah, and that's a great point, that we're not just talking about the individual small business owner here. This puts a damper on job growth generally, because as you said, it just makes it more expensive, makes it harder to hire.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, Chad, Glenn and I always appreciate the partnership between the Chamber of Commerce and NFIB. NFIB is one of the country's most respected voices for small business, and NFIB is fortunate to have you leading the charge here in Arizona, and we appreciate you bringing to light this issue of the failure of the authors of Prop 208 to account for inflation. It's a bad deal for Arizona. We're encouraging everyone to vote no, and we know the NFIB is as well.
Well, and again, thank you for hosting me on this broadcast, and do really appreciate the continued partnership that we have working on behalf of Arizona's business owners.
Thank you, Chad.
Thanks, Chad. We'll catch you on the next one. Glenn, another edition in the books. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks, Garrick.